You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. We always appreciate you joining us each and every week. Great to be back with you guys once again. And we know last week was our first week back after a little hiatus, but got a lot of positive responses from everybody that we are back, and we certainly appreciate all you guys listening every single week. A couple of notes before we get started this week with the episode. One, make sure you check us out on all those social media sites, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Follow us there. Keep up with everything the show is doing. Also, leave us a rating on iTunes and let us know what you think of the show. Doesn't have to be a long rating. Just anything helps us get the word out about the show. The more ratings we get, the more popular the show grows and the better guests we can get and keep things going here on the Hazard Ground. I want to tell you guys about a new partnership we have at the Hazard Ground that I am very excited to tell you about. It's the Share Military Initiative at the Shepherd Center. They are based in Atlanta, but they are one of the best organizations in the world for veterans. Now, the SHARE program is designed specifically for post 9/11 veterans experiencing difficulties from brain injuries, concussions, emotional or psychological issues, including PTSD. This program is special, and it's helped veterans from all over the country and has one goal for each and every person who comes through their doors: create a plan to help them improve their life. It starts with a 2-week assessment. You come right here to Atlanta and stay here. A 2-week assessment and an 8 to 12-week treatment program and 12 to 24 months of community transition follow-up. Program includes complimentary housing with on-site life skills support. Everything is here for you. You don't need to go anywhere. Once they welcome you in with open arms, you'll want to stay. They are different because they're built to help, no red tape, and to not only make sure you receive support, that you improve permanently. I've been to their facilities. I've seen them personally. These are some of the best people in the country at helping veterans rebuild their lives. Again, the Share Military Initiative at the Shepherd Center. This week's episode is brought to you by Blue Apron. Blue Apron delivers all the fresh ingredients and recipes you need in exactly the right proportions to make simple, seasonal home-cooked meals. New recipes are created each week by Blue Apron's culinary team, so you can learn to cook with new ingredients, cuisines, and cooking techniques. Meals are just 500 to 800 calories and start at just $8.74 a serving, and shipping is always, always free. I'm telling you, we've used Blue Apron many times here at the Hazard Ground. Their food is delicious, and every sponsor on the Hazard Ground is a product that we've used personally, and we stand behind 100%. Otherwise, we wouldn't waste time talking about it before the episode. Now, for a limited time, new customers are going to get $30 off their first order. That's right, $30 off your first order at blueapron.com. So go over to our website, hazardground.com/sponsors. Click on the Blue Apron banner. Remember, support for our sponsors goes right back into making Hazard Ground the best show it could possibly be. Once again, that's www.hazardground.com/sponsors. Click on the Blue Apron banner and get the discount and discover a better way to cook. Now on to this week's episode. This week's guest is a former Marine Corps captain, and he currently works for the Wall Street Journal at the Washington Bureau covering national security and veterans issues. He is Ben Kesling here on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Ben, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's interesting that you have the same field that I do, that is being in the media and working in that. I don't really run into many veterans who also do what I do from a media standpoint. So I'm kind of excited to talk to you about how you transitioned from the military into this career. But let's start back at the beginning, as we always do. Tell us how you got your start in the Marine Corps.
Well, I've actually went to OCS, went to Officer Candidate School after graduate school. So I started out a little bit later than most people going into the Marine Corps. I went to divinity school actually for a 3-year graduate degree. And while I was at divinity school, I was in college when 9/11 happened, and then I was in graduate school when Iraq happened, the invasion of Iraq, and about halfway through my time there in grad school, and I started realizing that I at the time supported what was going on in Iraq. I don't know if I would support it the same way now, but at the time I certainly did, and I thought if I support this conflict, then I need to do something about it. So I went down to the Marine Corps officer recruiter and signed up, and then as soon as I finished with graduate school, I went into OCS and went through OCS and became an infantry officer. And then was in for about for a little over 6 years.
So I want to back up for a minute, just as far as the
Sure.
initial enlistment sign up. Because you had a college degree, did they approach you about being an officer, or did you do your research and say, "Hey, I want to be an officer" when you went to sign up?
Well, I think I had the same experience that most people do when they go to see a recruiter.
You knew nothing.
You know very little, right? And I'd already had my college degree the first time I went in to see the recruiter. And when you go to a recruiter, like oftentimes you don't know to go see the officer selection officer. You go to the enlisted recruiter, and they always push the line to go in as an enlisted man, and then if you want to, you can go the officer route after that. And I started doing my research after that and realized maybe I want to just go the straight officer route. But I thought about it briefly for going the enlisted route. They never. The Marine Corps and the other branches I was looking at never really approached me to do the officer route. I think a lot of times whatever recruiting office you go into, they want to push whatever they're selling. So if you go into the enlisted recruiting office, they're not going to send you down the hall to the officer recruiters, and vice versa. But I had to do some research, talk to some friends who had served, and realized that I preferred going the officer route, even though I did think about the enlisted route.
All right, now let's go back even further. You said you were in college during 9/11. A lot of people signed up right after 9/11. You seem to have waited and kind of made some more life choices and career choices. So do you remember what happened the day of 9/11, and were you feeling any of these calls to service at that point in time?
To tell you the truth, I did not feel a call to go into the uniformed service at the time. I remember in college when 9/11 happened. I remember I was in my room and somebody said what was happening, and I thought it was almost too far fetched to be happening. So I didn't even pay attention to the news for a few hours, and then when I realized what was going on and everything that was happening, and started thinking about the ramifications of my life, at no point did I think, wow, I need to go in and serve now. At that time, I think a lot of college kids are focused on college and finishing that and trying to make that next life decision. And it really wasn't until I was kind of already thinking about graduate school and had already sort of started moving down that path. So it wasn't until getting to graduate school that I said, well, this conflict is still going on, and I really felt a call to serve at that time, and that call wasn't something that I could ignore. It was like there really was no other path for me at that time as far as what I wanted to do with my life. I knew that I wanted to serve. I knew I wanted to put on the uniform. When I went into the recruiter, like we talked about, I didn't know that much about the military life. My parents didn't serve. My grandfather did, but that I never really had a conversation with him about his time in the service. So I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even know what the pay scale was when I signed on the line. I just signed up. So I didn't even know what the paycheck was going to be when it came my way. But that tug, that inexorable tug to put on the uniform didn't happen until grad school. It certainly wasn't there in college.
All right. So when did you finish grad school, and when does your enlistment and officer training finish?
So I finished, I graduated, got my master's in management degree in 2005, and then I only waited a few weeks before going to OCS. I really it was very fortunate with the streamlined process from finishing school, getting approved, getting checked out with all the medical stuff and all the tests, and going straight in. And I went straight through OCS and then through the pipeline for the basic school, Corps, then infantry officer course, and then picked up with the battalion. And I think the battalion picked up with them at the end of 2006. I think that's when I got over to 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines.
Okay, and you don't get to Iraq until 2007, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, well, we just went through the normal workup. I mean, I think that everybody who's been in the military and the Marines are sort of notorious for this. Is every step of the process you figure, okay, I finally made it. I can be considered a Marine, but then it's like, well, you have this other thing you need to do. So you go to OCS, you become an officer, but that's you're not there yet. You got to go to the basic school. Then you finish that, and you think you're there, and you got to go to infantry officer course or whatever your particular specialty is, and then you pick up with your unit, and all these things happen, and you're never quite there until you actually get to that first deployment. So it wasn't until 2007, and going to Iraq during the surge or the awakening, right, or whatever name you want to use. That's sort of when you're finally there.
When you found out you got to unit and you were going right to Iraq, did you feel like, okay, this is what I signed up for? I'm glad this is happening so quickly, because I've run into so many people on this podcast who signed up to go, and they're like, they have to wait for one reason or another, whether it's schooling or whether it's, the unit just got back and then they have to wait another 6 months or whatever. You were going fairly quick. Were you excited about that prospect?
I guess excited. I guess excited is the right word, right? Like the first time anybody goes into this sort of thing, there is an excitement to it, right? Or like at least knowing that you're finally doing the thing that you signed up for. And yes, I mean, I was, I didn't even take time to sort of sit back and contemplate what was happening. It was like, this is the end result of signing on the dotted line, a year and a half or 2 years prior, however long it takes to go through the whole training pipeline. The training pipeline always does seem like it takes forever, though. I mean, like you said, you can't just show up at the processing center at MEPS and get your head shaved, and then the next day you're deployed. It takes a while to get going. So by the time that finally happens, even when the process has no hiccups and is as streamlined as possible, which is what I experienced. By the time it happens, you think, okay, finally, this is finally coming to fruition, right?
So look, you're a smart guy. You got a master's degree, for crying out loud, and obviously someone who works in journalism. You read, you follow the news. I mean, it's part of kind of what you do throughout your life. And knowing that you were going to Iraq, and the Marines were based mostly Ramadi, Fallujah, out in the Al Anbar province in the western part of Iraq, west of Baghdad. And you saw in 2005 and 2006 the rise in violence, and hence why we had this surge, as you called it, for the obviously those who were part of it know it, and anybody who knows the history of the war in Iraq knows the surge was a big part of it. President Bush, did the whole thing. Did you have any apprehension about what you were walking into and realizing how dangerous it was?
I mean, reflecting back on it, I mean, at the time I was dating somebody, but hadn't yet gotten married. I was still single, still relatively young. I'm in my mid-20s. I didn't have the same reflective nature on this sort of thing that you have as you get older and as you have a family and as you mature. I was Sure. still pretty young, and I think that I was more. And anybody who serves, right? Even if you are mature and have a family, there's the whole. You're deploying with your unit, the people that you've trained with. There's that esprit that comes with being in the Marine Corps, or being, if you're a soldier in the Army or whatever. Like there's this esprit that's there that sort of drives you through and ensures that you're ready to do this mission and ready to ready to deploy. And at the time, I mean, I guess I was cognizant of the danger, right? But it was more like finally we're doing what we signed up to do. And again, it was like, I do think the best word for it is fruition. Like it
right.
Finally, it's like you've added all the ingredients, and now the cake is ready to be baked, right? And that's the feeling that you had. And also, I mean, my feeling was I'd never been to the Middle East before. I didn't know. I mean, this is sort of the definition of a foreign land for me. All I knew about it was from pre-deployment training and reading about it. I'd never actually been there. So there was so much about this that I didn't know, and a lot of inexperience with the world. Anybody who's a young officer or a young enlisted guy or woman, you don't have that experience when you go over there. So all these things, lack of experience, lack of tangible knowledge, wanting to see what it's all about, going with the unit, having finished all the training, all these things just sort of propel you forward to want to get there and do it, right? To get there and do the thing that you've signed up for. And again, like I said before, you go through this training pipeline, and every time you graduate another school, you think, I'm finally made it. I finally can say I'm a Marine. But it's not until you go on that deployment, really, for me, that you can say, all right, I finally am there. So that is a large aspect of it as well.
Well, and I asked that, and I've related this story a couple of times on the podcast. In my time in Iraq, all throughout 2005 into 2006, I might have driven 6,000-7,000 miles all over the country. And the one place whenever I was told to go that really gave me the heebie-jeebies before I ever got in the vehicle was either Fallujah or Ramadi. It was a bad place to be in 2005 and 2006, and I was in Iraq when the Marines were hung from the bridge, and it was a place you just didn't want any part of if you didn't have to, at least from my standpoint. I'm not somebody who's ashamed to admit the fear of that mission in and of itself. It's not like I didn't do it and said, no, sir, I'm not going to go. But and
right.
When you get there, what was your mission? What were you told, and kind of what were the expectations?
Well, we, my company with golf company with 2nd Battalion 6th Marines, we were sent out to the south side of Fallujah, and we started out by just doing foot patrolling through the area. There was still kinetic violence in southern Fallujah at that time, and we just started with basic foot patrolling, and over time the battalion, the regiment, and the broader strategy for the area expanded to into this surge awakening program, and then the company eventually pushed out platoons to take up positions in town and set up joint security stations. So to set up these small outposts all throughout the city in order to really deny any movement for the enemy and to have a closer connection with the populace. And that's it was called Operation Alja in Fallujah, and that operation was how the deployment ended. So we started out by doing standard foot patrolling out of a company base, and then by the end of it, we were living. My platoon was living in town at a house that had been converted to this joint security station. So that's how the mission sort of changed over the months we were there.
Someone who didn't have any military training and knew very little about the Middle East, were you surprised at the level of violence that you walked into Fallujah?
I can't say that. I mean,
should I rephrase it? Should I rephrase it and say, how much violence did you see while you were there?
There was not what I would, me personally, and what I saw, I would not consider a large level of violence. There was kinetic activity. We had, did have a couple Marines who were wounded from my platoon, and we had some casualties in the battalion, but there wasn't that sort of 2004 Al-Fajr sort of level of violence. It was far less than that. So I don't know how to really frame talking about the level of violence.
No, I mean that's a fair perspective. I mean, it's different in all different parts. I mean, Fallujah's, for all things considered, like every city has different parts to it, and some were more violent than others. So I just wasn't sure how much you actually encountered. So that's why I kind of wanted to rephrase the question. But when you have a casualty in your platoon or you lose a guy, what was that experience like for you? And did it change your perspective of what you were doing?
The Marine that was in my platoon and got, I think this was the first Marine from the platoon who was wounded. It was, thankfully, he recovered quickly. It was a gunshot wound to the arm, and it just, I think anytime you have any kind of a casualty, right? You rethink the way you do things, why you're doing things, your tactics, techniques, and procedures, how you're going about the mission. So I think that anytime that happens, you think, why are we doing this? Can we do it better? Was there any way to avoid what happened? Is that an inevitability? Is that, you go through all of that, thinking through that stuff.
I mean, you would go out on foot patrols, and just go walking through the town, the city, whatever it may be. What was that experience like for you? Does anything stand out about it? I mean, any interactions either with military personnel, civilians in Iraq, or whatever it may be?
Well, there are a couple. I mean, there's a number of things that I remember, but there was the first foot patrol we went out on. Really stood out to me because we're on this foot patrol through town, and we stop at a house and knock and go in, and there's a family from Fallujah. There's an Iraqi family in this house, and I remember one of the Marines sort of did almost like a double take, and because you're finally seeing the real life people that you've had all this training that you're going to be interacting with them, and here they are. And I remember myself like thinking, okay, wow, this is real. This is like this is putting all the practice into all the practice into an actual game here. And I remember saying to one of the Marines, like, "Yep, this is an actual Iraqi. So let's do our job. Let's interact. Let's do what we're trying to do." And started talking with them and working through that first house, that first set of actual people on the ground in Fallujah, civilians that we need to foster relationships with building trust with. And I remember that very first house I went into, and that being sort of I don't know, to use another metaphor, right? Like the clutch finally engages and you're off. And I remember that very, very clearly. Another moment that I remember very clearly, and I think it's quite, I think it illustrates a number of things that the military does, thinks it does well, but doesn't necessarily do well, and could do better, and really, it's the nuances of being of knowing how to have individual interactions with individual people. I mean, anybody who's deployed and is and in pre-deployment training or whatever, right? You're told that if you're offered something from someone, you take it, because if you don't take it, then it's considered rude and you've insulted someone, right? And we went to this. There's this dairy farmer, a gentleman who had cows here in Fallujah. We went to his home, and we were in his living room, and he brings out a glass of fresh milk for me. And I think I had just been sick and just gotten over having stomach issues from being in country. And he offers me this glass of milk, and I think, okay, if I don't want to turn this down because it'll insult him, but I was like, I know if I drink this milk right now, I'm not going to be able to, I won't be able to stomach it, right? So I said, well, might as well, if I'm just honest with the guy, it'll work out. So I said, I'm sorry. I said, sorry. I have an interpreter with us. I said, I apologize. I can't drink this milk. And I pointed to my gut. I said, I got an American stomach. And he started laughing and said, okay, I'll bring you Coke instead. I said, all right, great. And it was it was one of those moments where, you kind of, as long as, I don't know, if you just tap into some sort of an underlying humanity or attempt to have a personal relationship, that's more important than going through that. That was more important than going through the actual, XYZs of what the handbook says you're supposed to do. And I remember that very clearly. And we had had a good conversation after that. But I told him there was no way I could drink that milk.
That's funny. I mean, I have a similar story. We were right in the middle of downtown Baghdad recruiting, and forget exactly where we were, just right in the heart of the city. And I worked with Iraqis every single day. I mean, I was doing foreign and internal defense. So, I was side by side training with Iraqis. And one of my Iraqi soldiers walked around the corner to this little dilapidated hut. And there was smoke billowing out from the top of it. And he comes out with it's like shawarma, meat inside a pita. A piece of pita bread, and he brings it over to me, and he wants me to eat it. And I asked him, where'd you get this? And he pointed around, and I walked over there, I saw it. And Ben, if you saw this shack, you're like, there's nothing you should ever eat that comes out of this shack. I mean, the brick and mortar were barely standing together. This little old man was inside there cooking on what, I don't know. But I was in the same kind of conundrum, where he hands me this thing. I'm like, if I tell this guy no right now, I'm going to ruin whatever relationship I have with him. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, whatever mystery meat I'm about to put in my mouth could feasibly kill me at some point in time. So, you get in that spot. But those are the bonds, I think, that you talk about. And when you reflect back on kind of that relationship, when you can remove the I'm an American, you're an Iraqi, I am here as essentially a combatant, and you are a civilian, and we're supposed to have some sort of animosity. But when you break down all those barriers and those walls, and you start to be able to communicate in a one-on-one basis, some of it becomes a lot, more real. And I think there is an empathy there on both sides that is underscored throughout at least the Iraq war, because there was a lot of that working side by side.
Yeah. And I mean, on some level as well, by the time I was getting to the end of that deployment, and, now that I travel in the region as a reporter and talking to people out of uniform, I realized that there's the odds the odds of having a genuine interaction with someone was about zero when you're in uniform, because it's all being mediated through you in you're carrying an M4 or whatever, right? Like you're never going to be able to, it's very difficult to have sort of any kind of a true one-on-one, a true even conversation or interaction with anyone, because you're in uniform. You're there with up armored Humvees, or you're there with a platoon full of guys with M16s, right? And by the time we were getting to the end of the deployment, I was really recognizing that fact and trying, and however possible, to either acknowledge that when I was talking to people, to whether it's Iraqi army, police, civilians, whomever, and try to do what was possible to I guess somehow break down that artifice. I mean, it was, it's impossible, but you could do what you can to try to, and over time you have to learn that you can't ignore that fact. There's no way to have that conversation on any kind of an equal footing, because of the nature of being deployed to someone's country in uniform with your weapons. But I tried to acknowledge that and move through that to have as much of an unmediated conversation and interaction with people as possible. But I mean, I don't know what your experience is, but mine is it's never ever possible to fully break down those barriers, and I'm sure that even my me thinking that I recognize the existence of those barriers and the extent to them, I probably still am miles away from knowing what those true barriers are.
No, certainly. I mean, I would tend to agree with your thought process on the whole. I mean, obviously exceptions, but generally that is correct. You mentioned that you had gone back in your civilian job. I know that's ahead. I want to get to that because I think those juxtapositions are very interesting. But you leave after this deployment. How does the rest of your military career go? Do you end up going back, and why do you decide to get out?
Well, after the Iraq deployment, I was deployed to Afghanistan. I was attached to ISAF NATO training team, and was in Afghanistan. Went around southern Afghanistan a bit, and then when I finished with that, I did Marine Corps security guard inspecting officer work. So I was based in the Middle East at that time, and working out of the embassies and consulates, and sort of seeing the suit and tie side of some of the Marine Corps, and then finished up with that after some time, and then finished out my time in 29 Palms in California doing training officer work to prepare guys who were going over on engagement teams to Afghanistan. So kind of rounded up the picture that way. I ended up getting out for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons that, or one of the things that helped smooth the transition was I made sure to line up my VA benefits so I could use the GI Bill to go back to school again. And after having done Marine Corps security work and working in embassies and consulates, seeing the way that folks in the embassy and the way people throughout the region, whether they're Americans or English speaking, Canadians, Australians, Brits, or people from the region itself, the way that they understood world events and understood and things they read and watched to get their news. Seeing that whole process made me very interested in it, and knowing I thought that this is something I could contribute to. I've got some tangible experience in the area. I've got tangible experience in the region. I think that a lot of the things that I saw and did in the area could inform telling stories humanely and telling stories that try to cut through that mediation again as much as possible, and give recognize the barriers that exist and try to address them, and tell stories and to report the news. And I thought that would be a fascinating career. So went to graduate school on the GI Bill, and while at graduate school, I used Marine Corps connections insofar as I went to there was a sort of a job, at graduate school you have the different employers come and interview people, and I just happened to talk to someone who from the Wall Street Journal has had a connection with the Marine Corps, so I clicked with that person, and before you know it, I have an internship at the Wall Street Journal, and then got hired on full time as a staff reporter.
Wow, pretty incredible. The Veterans Network's strong, so glad that worked out for you that way. As you start your career as a writer and a journalist, is there something pulling you back to that experience that you wanted to go back? Did you know you wanted to go back when you first started, or was that just something that happenstance, came across your path?
It was something that it's not something that I said, I really want to go back, and I really want to go back to Iraq. That wasn't a 100% must-do career goal. But I thought, the conflict is still going on there. I would like to, at some point, go back and cover what's happened in the country since I've deployed there, and what the current status of Iraq is, how it fits into the region, and to sort of see what the wages of all that time and American influence, and for good or for bad, on that country, where things stood. But it really wasn't until ISIS swept into Mosul that opportunity really presented itself. And we, at that point, the Journal was said, "Hey, would you mind, or can you go and cover this?" I was more than happy to. I put my hand up and said, I'd like to go cover this conflict. And slowly but surely, I started going over and over again to the region, and for the duration of the conflict with Islamic State in Iraq, I was fairly regularly going over and doing that coverage, and it was extraordinarily rewarding to go back and cover military issues from the ground, and to go back to some of the places that I had been deployed a decade before.
It's interesting. My first deployment ended in 2006, and I remember, I kept a journal, and I remember remarking in that journal saying, I actually hope to come back in 5 to 10 years, and see what this place is like, and maybe even vacation here, because I had seen so much of the country, and I felt like that, if things, worked out the way we all had thought they would by the end of 2006, that, the conflict would end sooner rather than later, and you'd have a stable relationship and so on and so forth. And I did get to go back 5 years later, except I deployed there again a second time to Iraq for the closeout. And I remember when I got back there, one of the first things I wanted to do was just take a drive around to all the places that I used to go, within limits, obviously, because it was still a dangerous place. And I remember looking at a 2011 Iraq versus a 2006 Iraq and going, nothing's changed except everything's worse, if that makes any sense. Like nothing had gotten better. Everything that was old and torn and worn down just got more old, more torn, more worn down. And I felt like when I got back there the second time, not that everything we did the first time was for naught, but almost like we should have all seen this end coming. Did you feel the same way when you got back there, that whatever changes were there, it was like, well, this was expected or this was unexpected?
I didn't feel that. I didn't feel that at all. I felt, well, first of all, going back as a journalist, you see when you're there deployed, you see the sort of the obverse of the coin, right? And when you go as a civilian, you see the reverse of it, right? So mm-hmm. It opens up a whole new perspective, a whole new way to look at things. I mean, when you're deployed, even no matter how much you see when you're deployed, you're still like looking through that soda straw, right? Like you're never seeing a whole broad picture, and you're also always seeing it mediated through, like I said, you're seeing it mediated through wearing a uniform and being a member of the military in someone else's country. When you go back as a civilian, you see different things. You interact with people differently. You get a different perspective, a broader perspective. You get to see and understand the country in a different way. And you also, I think, see and understand the problems and the wonderful and lovely things about the country in a different way. So when I went back, I was going back to Iraq when Islamic State was threatening to take more. I mean, they'd just taken Mosul. They just taken this huge city, and they were threatening to move into Erbil even. And it was a dark time for the country to go back. And yet when I got there and went back again and again, even during those times, and that conflict with Islamic State was at its greatest in Iraq, I still marveled at the way that the Iraqi society was rebounding, and there was not for me any feeling like, oh geez, like what a waste of American blood and treasure. I thought this is just, what's happening there is just a natural evolution. There's not some sort of map that's laid out for the country, and if it's not followed to the T, then it's been a disaster. It's sort of like, you go into a country and you can't exactly dictate what's going to happen in the end. You're opening up to use a extraordinarily trite metaphor. You open up a can of worms, and there's no way to know ultimately what things are going to happen. So for me to see the direction that Iraq has gone, I can't feel bad about it. I can't feel good about it. It just is the direction that the country is going, and I want to better understand that and to better be able to convey the realities of why the direction, why is it taking the why is it going in the direction it's going, and what the current state of affairs there. I think that maybe that's in part because I'm approaching it as a reporter now, so I'm necessarily looking at it through sort of a news perspective, saying here's what exists, and here's what's led up to that, and why it's sort of moved in that direction, and in some ways withholding value judgments, right?
Mm-hmm. You got a chance to go back to Fallujah, to where you were stationed during your deployment as a reporter. What stands out about that, and what are your impressions and memories of it?
Well, that was the last trip I've had to Iraq. Was going back there I went to Fallujah to see if I could find and easily recognize the neighborhood that we were deployed to and where we were. And Fallujah is, going back there and stopping at their shawarma shop, on one of the main roads that we drove in on up armored 7 tons when we came to town, and going there now in a civilian SUV and stopping for shawarma and a Pepsi was in some ways it was surreal, and then going down to the southern end of town where the company base was, HESCO barriers, and the hooches built there and everything, and coming up and finding that spot where the company base was, and not being sure whether or not, knowing that I was in the right spot and looking at it, but not being able to really tell if that was it, because it was everything was gone except for the remnants of some HESCO barriers and some piles of ISIS pressure plate IEDs that were stacked up in a corner. And seeing, that was very stark to see a place that, you helped build and fortify and was brand spanking new, or pretty new when you got there, to be completely gone and now just a scar on the landscape and forgotten. And wondering, well, what did being there with this, when this base was here and what's come after it, like what was, how much good, how much bad ultimately was done from this deployment. That to me was very striking, seeing that spot, and then going back and seeing the house where my platoon lived in its joint security station, seeing that, and going back to the 10 years after, going back to walk in the same places that we were patrolling a decade before, and to go back in civilian clothes and do that, not having to wear full body armor and helmet and carrying M4 was, it was, it's an experience that I think a lot of service members would want and would cherish, to be able to go back and see that place, and to not have the immediate threat of violence.
No, I agree. I would love to go back. There are certain places where things happen to me. I would love to go back and stand in that spot again. Just to, I don't know if it's cathartic or what, but just to go back and stand in that spot again and look around and then think back to how in the world did you ever get the hell out of there in one piece? And I don't know. To me, yes, I agree 100%. It definitely is an experience that if I was ever offered, I would love to do. And I hope one day to do it at some point in time in the somewhat near future. But
and I think you're right I think you're right about the calling, having it being a cathartic, sort of a cathartic experience, right? And it's not like no matter what has happened to the place, but to be able to just go back, right, and to be in that same spot that you had been deployed before. No matter how much you've changed, no matter how much of the place has changed, but just to go back and see what it's like 10 years later, there is some sort of a closure there, even if it's not like, Iraq is Fallujah still, it's who knows what's going to happen in parts of Anbar in the future. Who knows what's going to happen in Iraq, but at that very time, to go back and be there, there is sort of a catharsis, and I do think that like you said, everybody would want to do that, right?
It's an experience I think that every war veteran would cherish, just because it takes you back to what you had to survive to get through, and makes you feel fortunate about where you are in life now. Let me ask you real quickly, as far as your work covering veterans situations and veterans issues, because this is obviously a hot button here for all veterans, but what stands out to you, or what's the biggest thing in covering veterans issues that you come across, whether it's politically, as far as may it be the VA or anything along those lines, or is it other stuff that's more personal that you get to cover with veterans and telling their stories?
Well, the one thing that I think is extraordinarily important when covering veterans issues is understanding knowing the complexity of the veterans system in America, right? Because it's not just the VA, right? The VA is the federal entity, and it's the second largest department in the federal government. It's a massive budget, massive numbers of employees, massive healthcare system, largest they have the largest integrated healthcare system in the United States. But then with that, you also have all the state departments of Veterans Affairs, and then you have all these charities, all these veteran service organizations. You have Congress dealing with veterans issues. Within the VA, you have multiple departments for cemetery administration, the healthcare side, the pension side, the benefits side. There's just so many moving parts, and trying to really get a handle on that and ensure that when covering veterans issues, whether it's budgets or people trying to get benefits, people trying to get health care, how the healthcare system works, how it fits into it, just trying to understand and convey through reporting and through talking with veterans the immensity and the complexity of the whole thing. And there's times when it really having served really serves me well in this position, because I can talk to fellow veterans about things. I can sort of understand when I talk to the Department of Defense how certain parts, certain terminology, how things move. I think that brings a lot to the beat. Is having that knowledge of having served myself.
Any regrets about your service? Anything you look back on that you wish you'd done differently, or anything that you didn't get a chance to do that you kind of look back on and say, "Wish I had a chance to do that"?
Well, I don't think you'll ever meet a veteran of any stripe. Well, maybe you will, but I think it's very rare to meet somebody who's gotten out that doesn't miss it on some level, right? That doesn't say, oh man, I wish I would have stayed in a little bit longer, or I should have done this. I should have gone to jump school. I should have gone to Ranger school or whatever. Like there's always, there's many things that you wish you would have done, or you wish that you still would be doing in the military. But at the same time, there's anybody who's gotten out and is honest, right? Like, well, I think at least a little bit of them has to say they miss it, and they wish they would have done something differently, whatever it is. They wish they would have done more. They wish they would have, signed up 3 months before, and then gone through the pipeline 3 months earlier, and then they would have been in the unit that deployed to X rather than the unit that deployed to Y, right? I think there's so many what ifs in the military. There's like a military career, like you drive it, you steer it, and you take it in the direction, you try to take it in the direction that you can. But there's a lot of chance, luck, and being in the right spot that comes with it. And in the Marine Corps, you go as an officer, you go in, and you really don't. There's no guarantee what job you're going to get. You could get assigned to artillery, to be an adjutant, to go into the infantry. And you work towards whatever military occupational specialty that you want, but there's nothing guaranteeing that. So there's a little bit of luck involved in anything. So, for me, I can't, other than just saying, man, I wish I would, maybe I should have stayed in, maybe I should have done more, maybe I should have done one more, signed up for another few years. There's nothing that I really truly regret, and I'm very happy about that. But there is, getting out. I'm glad that I got out because I was ready to get out, and I left the Marine Corps because, frankly, I didn't want to do B billets and all the staff stuff that comes with a career in the Marine Corps. I didn't want to do that. And I got out and was content with my decision, and then took advantage of all the experience and knowledge that I had, and also the benefits that all of us veterans have, and use GI Bill to move forward with that. So I have nothing that I really wanted to do and didn't get to do. That's the short answer that you were looking for.
Well, Ben, listen, it's an incredibly unique story. Not a lot of us get a chance to go back as a civilian, even if it's in a working capacity, to visit a place that they had to wear a uniform and fight in combat and try to win hearts and minds. And so from that standpoint, it certainly has been a pleasure talking to you, and I really think you brought some unique perspective to a lot of our listeners here on the Hazard Ground. Of course, again, you write for the Wall Street Journal. Let everybody know where they can get your stuff, how they can follow you on social media, see whatever articles and columns you have coming out. Give everybody the information.
All right. Yeah. The best way to follow is just Wall Street Journal, the print and online version, right? And then on Twitter, I'm at my handle is B Kesling, BKESLING, and that's where I do most of my stuff is on Twitter. So feel free to follow.
Listen, keep up the great work. I've enjoyed your reading since we booked you here on the Hazard Ground a couple of weeks ago, and knew you were coming on, and I think your work is fantastic, and as long as you're continuing to advocate for veterans and their side and their stories and their needs, I think you always have a backing from the veterans community, and it's certainly a great voice to have. So with that, Ben Kesling, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.